Hello friends, and welcome to stream. It's the day. It is finally the day of like presentation stuff. So we're gonna go over here. Haha, it's there. It's functional. It works. The month of May, the entire month of May, is Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month. So I'm gonna do you guys a little bit of a learning because I have this illness and it took me a very long time. I actually don't know that I remember the exact number of years. Many years of suffering to get a diagnosis because nobody knew what it was. And so I think that if this helps even one person, then it will have been a success. Yes, yes? Yes. So we'll start with, I am not a doctor. I cannot diagnose you. I will do my best to explain the condition though, and I will be answering a few questions about my personal experience. However, it's important to note that my experience is not universal. So first we'll start with EDS is a connective tissue disorder caused by a genetic mutation. There are currently a few known mutations, but some of them have not yet been identified. So they have genetic markers for some of the types, but not for the others. They're working on it though. It's a bit like if you gave complicated blueprints to a toddler with Legos. Basically, collagen makes up about 4% of your body. It's in every part of you. It's in your skin, your muscles, your bones, your organs. It's everywhere. With this genetic mutation, your body doesn't build the collagen correctly, and so you can end up with a lot of problems. Oh, fun fact. The human body has 350 joints. It's not just shoulders and knees, which is I think what most people think of when they think of, joints. Ribs have joints too. So do your teeth. And you can dislocate them. So brief history of EDS. It's not a new illness. In fact, it was first described by Hippocrates himself in 400 BC. The illness was named, though, after Doctors Ehlers and Danlos, both of whom recognized the symptoms as a distinct condition in the early 1900s. I believe they were not working together. They were working separately, and they both just kind of discovered it at the same time, and so it ended up being named after both of them. The diagnostic criteria and classifications of types was first updated in 1986, then again in 98, and finally again in 2017. There's a lot of ongoing research though, which means that these criteria will probably be updated again before too long. So EDS also has a mascot. The mascot is a zebra. The term zebra is frequently used for rare diagnoses. There's a common phrase in medicine that reminds new doctors to focus first on what is common. So when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. And this certainly allows them to treat patients more efficiently, but sometimes they stop looking when none of the usual suspects fit, and that can be a problem. There are currently 13 known types of EDS. This is likely to change. Hypermobile EDS, for example, is likely multiple unique types lumped under one umbrella for the time being. I suspect that will get parsed out into more types later on. So all types of EDS are considered rare, some far more so than others. Myopathic EDS, for example, has only had 11 reported cases ever. There are a few common symptoms experienced by all types. Joint hypermobility, where joints have a greater range of motion than usual. Some people with joint hypermobility also have joint instability, which can lead to frequent sprains, subluxations, and dislocations. Skin hyperextensibility, where the skin can be stretched beyond the normal range. Some people may also have unusual skin texture, usually described as velvety. They typically also have very thin skin and abnormal scarring. And then tissue fragility, where the body is generally more vulnerable to damage. On the surface, this can be seen as easy bruising and slow healing. It is important to note that it is possible to have joint hypermobility without having EDS. Lots of kids are hypermobile. Gymnasts, for example, are also pretty flexible. And it is also possible to have EDS without having joint hypermobility. In fact, one of the more recent changes to the diagnostic criteria addresses the loss of hypermobility with age, and many people aren't diagnosed until later in life. Usually later on, your muscles start to stiffen around the joint to compensate for the stretchy tendons and ligaments, which means that you are less flexible than doctors typically would have expected to see. Most types of Ehlers-Danlos are known as invisible illnesses. This means that you wouldn't know someone was sick just by looking at them. As a result, most people with the condition are not taken seriously when discussing their symptoms, even in medical settings. I've personally had doctors Google EDS in front of me, and I appreciate that they're willing to admit they don't know much about the illness and are trying to learn more about it, but it can still be a little bit discouraging. The severity of the illness can also vary a lot from person to person. Some people might be able to live near normal lives and others may be bedridden. So there's vascular EDS, which affects roughly 1 in 100,000 people. This type primarily affects blood vessels and organs, and this one can actually be confirmed with a genetic test. There's a little bit more detail here about which genes the defects present on, if you guys are interested in that. One of the other more common types is classical EDS, which affects roughly 1 in 50,000 people. It primarily affects the skin and can also be confirmed with genetic testing. The most common type affects roughly 1 in 3,000, so it's actually quite a bit more common than I think most people think that it is. So hypermobile type accounts for 90% of all cases. Unfortunately, it's the only type for which there is currently no genetic marker. They are working on this though, and I think that what is currently known as hypermobile type is actually several subtypes that haven't been parsed out yet. So hypermobile type is actually the type that I have as well. This is the type that I was diagnosed with. The remaining types all affect less than 1 in a million. But if you'd like more information on them, there are a couple of good resources. Ehlers-Danlos.com will give you lots of information about each of the types specifically. And they actually added this really cool feature recently where they have a visual representation of all of the symptoms for all of the different types. EDS usually... Oh, wait, no, I forgot this meme. I would be unstoppable if not for the tired sleepy. Let's see, EDS comes with comorbidities, which is the occurrence of 2 or more illnesses at the same time. Sometimes the primary illness causes a secondary illness, but sometimes you just get dealt a really bad hand in life. Some of the common comorbidities include anxiety, arthritis, brain fog, Chiari malformation, which is a condition where part of your brain slides down into your spinal canal. Not great. Chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, gastroparesis, which is paralysis or partial paralysis of your digestive system, IBS, mast cell activation syndrome, which is a condition that mimics allergies, nearsightedness, peripheral neuropathy, photophobia, Raynaud's phenomenon, scoliosis, tinnitus, so much more. There's a ton. This year, while I was looking, I came across a research paper that addressed some of the comorbidities. So they looked at a group of people with EDS and looked at what other illnesses they had, like in addition, and then compared the prevalence rates to that of the general adult population. And as you can see, for example, fibromyalgia appears in about 50% of people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but it only appears in about 5% of the general population. Additionally, we have here the pain scale, which I feel is kind of important when talking about a chronic illness like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Pain is subjective, and it's important not to rely on your own experience when trying to understand another person's pain level. I tried to summarize this in a way that makes sense, I think, for most people. So obviously 0 is no pain. 1 to 3 is mild pain. It's usually distracting, annoying, but you can kind of ignore it usually. 4 to 6, I would consider moderate pain. This is more distracting and does significantly impair your daily living activities. So it can be difficult to work, it can be difficult to do chores, it can be difficult to think. I would say the 7 to 9 is severe pain. This is debilitating. You are unable to perform your daily living activities at all. You're usually stuck in bed. And then a 10 is just unspeakable pain. Like, you are delirious, basically. And I think that very few people in general have experienced this level of pain. So as some of you know, I had a little survey where people could submit questions. And some of these questions are from last year. I did get some new ones this year, but mostly they were repeats. So I will address those again. Someone asked, what is the extent of my condition? I would say that I have a moderate case that unfortunately seems to be getting worse recently. It is severe enough that it affects my daily life, but I'm not miserable. So, don't worry about it. And then there was, is there anything you need to be careful about? And I kind of lumped my answer to that underneath, how do you play Beat Saber? Which, again, I totally understand. The answer is very carefully. For me, it is important to move with purpose, and this applies to everything, not just Beat Saber. But for Beat Saber specifically, I try not to correct for my mistakes at the last minute, because a sudden change in momentum is what usually results in an injury. I would compare it to trying not to catch a dropped kitchen knife. So like, say you're cooking, you drop the knife, you're not supposed to try to catch it, because if you try to catch it, you might accidentally catch the blade and then bam, you're injured. So it is difficult to train yourself not to overcorrect, to just let mistakes happen. So let's see, I also got asked, what are my thoughts on braces? And this was and still is a bit of a controversial topic. On the one hand, braces help keep your joints where they're supposed to be, and thus reduce pain and improve mobility. But on the other hand, if you wear them for a very long period of time, you can cause the muscles around your joints to weaken and actually end up making joint instability worse in the long run. So I think that braces are best used in moderation on particularly rough days or while recovering from an injury, and that physical therapy is probably a better long-term solution for joint instability. How do I manage my symptoms? So the most difficult thing, I think, is figuring out which treatments work for which problems. As you guys saw, there can be a lot of problems. And then also not overusing the treatments so as to create new problems, such as with braces. Heating pads and ice packs can be great for different kinds of pain, but you can absolutely cause permanent damage. I have maybe in the past possibly burned myself with a heating pad before, but it was worth it. Blackout curtains, great for migraines, great for photophobia. Sometimes you just want to be in the darkness, right? But sunlight is still important for mental and physical health. You gotta get that vitamin D. You gotta go out and touch grass once in a while. For me, distractions typically work pretty well, video games primarily, which is, why we're here, right? Of course, having lots and lots of pillows is great for extra support while sleeping. And then, of course, there are painkillers. Access to painkillers is a big conversation. The TLDR is that chronic pain patients face a lot of unnecessary hurdles when it comes to medications. Something needs to be done to address this, but I admit that I don't know how best to handle it. So I'll just say that personally, for me, painkillers are a last resort, reserved for 7+ level pain. I don't like how painkillers make me feel. They kind of take away your ability to think clearly. But sometimes that is worth it if pain too high. One of the new questions that I got this year was, what are my thoughts on spoon theory? Which I was actually kind of surprised to get, because I don't know, what are my thoughts on spoon theory? But first, I think I need to explain spoon theory, which, for those of you who don't know, was a metaphor created to explain the fatigue of chronic illness to healthy people. The idea is that you start off each day with a designated number of spoons, and each of your daily tasks costs a certain number of spoons. So showering, cooking, going to work or school or an appointment, even things you enjoy, like hanging out with your friends or going to see a movie or eating out at a restaurant, they all have a cost. They all cost a certain number of spoons. And so you have to budget your spoons carefully. And if you run out of spoons for the day, you can technically borrow from tomorrow, but eventually you won't have enough left to even get out of bed. People with chronic illness start their days with less spoons than healthy people, and usually spend more spoons trying to do anything. Work or school can be more draining when you're in pain. If you've ever tried to do anything with a headache, then you at least understand this a little bit. You don't get very much done. Some folks also have to deal with additional daily tasks like doctor appointments, physical therapy, frequent tests, or treatments. And so then you're just adding more things that you have to spend spoons on. Yeah, you gotta find the spoon dealer. Exactly. Generally, my thoughts are that I kind of like the metaphor. It does a pretty good job of explaining things. However, I think that it can also downplay the struggle of living with chronic illness. Some chronically ill people have adopted the term spoonie. It sounds cute, right? And to me, it feels a little bit like censoring yourself for the comfort of others. So I think that there can be a risk of people taking your experiences less seriously if you use terms like that with the wrong group of people. I don't know why, but like this presentation is mildly nerve-wracking. I don't know why I get so nervous giving this presentation, but you know, here we are. Any breakthroughs since last year? I suppose the other mildly concerning thing, at least in the US, is that a lot of research this year has come to a halt. So I don't know if there are things that would have been published this year that have been put on hold now because of a lack of funding. I know that the UK, I think, has a pretty big interest in researching Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I'm trying to think if there were other... I think I saw a lot of Italian studies. The problem with the Italian studies is that they're all in Italian and I can't read them. I did see that there was some progress being made on trying to sort people who have been diagnosed with hypermobile type into individual groups based on their unique symptoms. There are, for example, a lot of people who have, you know, like the digestive issues, but then there are a lot of people that don't, and right now they're both labeled as hypermobile type, whereas it's possible that those are actually two distinct types of EDS, and they just haven't given them separate subtypes yet. So that's something that they're working on. And I think that if they spend more time doing that, they might have a better idea of where to look for the genetic mutations, and then it will be easier to get a diagnosis. Because right now, they do the genetic test, and then if you don't have any of the types that show up on a genetic test, they have to do the ruling everything else out process, which is a lot of testing and a lot of medical history and a lot of time, basically. So it kind of sucks. But yeah, so there. Now you all have been educated. You all have learned a little bit about the EDS, and I will likely edit this and post it on YouTube and or re-record it entirely because yeah, we'll likely do it again next year. If you are headed to bed for tonight, I hope that you rest well. Remember to brush your teeth, to take your medicines, to hydrate, and if you have to get up in the morning, to set your alarm clock. And if you're headed out into the world for today, I hope that you have safe travels and just generally a good day. And I will see you guys on Monday. Have a fantastic weekend. Bye-bye!